Welcome to Duck Season Somewhere podcast. This episode is brought to you by the following sponsors. GetDucks.com, your proven source for the very best waterfowl hunting adventures. Argentina, Mexico, 6 whole continents worth. For 2 decades, we've delivered real duck hunts for real duck hunters. And USHuntList.com, because the next great hunt is closer than you think. Search our database of proven U.S. and Canadian outfits. Contact them directly with confidence. Trust is earned. By the numbers, 121 waterfowl subspecies bagged on 6 continents, 20 countries, 36 U.S. states, and growing. I spend upwards of 225 days per year chasing ducks, geese, and swans worldwide. And I don't choose shotguns for the brand name or the cool factor. Y'all know me way better than that. I've shot Benelli for over 2 decades. I continue shooting Benelli shotguns for their simplicity, utter reliability, and superior performance. Whether hunting near home or halfway across the world, that is the stuff that matters. Sit means sit and stay until it doesn't. No matter how well or how often trained, retrievers want those ducks as badly as we do, maybe even more. Chardog might be titled, but she's still just a dog. I'm over 50 years old and I still do dumb stuff, trust me. Retrievers are family. I wouldn't endanger my children near heavy traffic, and I'm not going to risk my dog jumping in front of blazing guns either. Gundog Outdoors' patented quick-release safety system is fully adjustable, tethers to any blind or stand, has titanium stakes for frozen ground, and a quick-release marine-grade shackle to quickly release Fido when the smoke clears. Visit GunDogOutdoors.com. Connect with them on Instagram at Gundog Outdoors to see their growing line of Gundog safety and performance products. Enter hashtag GetDucks to receive 15% discount off of your first order. Boss Shot Shell's copper-plated bismuth tin alloy is the good old days again. Steel shot's come a long way in the past 30 years, but will never, ever perform like good old-fashioned lead. Say goodbye to all that gimmicky, high recoil, compensation, science, hype, and hello to superior performance. Know your pattern, take ethical shots, make clean kills. That is the boss way. The good old days are now. It really is duck season somewhere for 365 days per year. Duck season somewhere takes me year-round to worldwide destinations where I visit with the most interesting people. I'm your host, Ramsey Russell. Join me here to listen to those conversations.
In California, the local history of duck and goose hunting is a story about hunting as an integral part of California's environmental, social, economic, and even cultural history. In this story, we learn about the utter transformation of the state's landscape, from the Pacific coast to the Central Valley to the desert interior. As early as 1850, when California joined the Union as the 31st state, the state contained an estimated 5 million acres of wetland. The same year, the Federal Swamp and Overflowed Lands Act, which turned swamplands into the public domain over the states to be sold and reclaimed, initiated the process of draining California's vast freshwater and tidal marshes, primarily for agricultural development. The process of reclamation, carried on even larger scales, continued largely unchallenged until well into the 20th century. But the discovery of the Pacific Flyway and its importance to the migratory waterfowl of western North America began to change all of it. Once California's importance for providing migratory bird habitat, especially for wintering waterfowl, became well understood, the tide of reclamation began to turn both the state and federal wildlife refuges that were created to protect and restore as much of the state's remaining wetland habitat as possible. By the end of the 19th and the early 20th century, well before the establishment of refuges, duck clubs proliferated in California. There were actually some 1,000 active ones as recently as today, and some 2,600 over time. Beginning in the San Francisco Bay Area, the range of shooting clubs expanded as railroads especially, and later the automobile, rendered formerly remote locations more accessible. Now, as we bring this story to light, I want you to try to imagine the turn-of-the-century duck clubs and wetlands throughout what is now the urban development of San Francisco Bay and the urban conglomeration that is Greater Los Angeles. We see how the Sacramento Flood Control Project of the early 20th century finally led to the draining of the Sacramento Valley's vast marshes. You can imagine 10 miles of tules on both sides of the state's largest river, the Sacramento River, and why the valley's Butte Sink followed a different course and remained a waterfowl mecca. We discover how the Central Valley Project, which moved water from Northern California to Southern California, threatened to obliterate the wetlands of the lower San Joaquin Valley until during the 1940s and 50s, duck hunters in the San Joaquin grasslands organized to fight back and protect them. We ponder unintended consequences of our manipulation of nature, and we learn about the accidental creation of the Salton Sea and the sea's unique role in California waterfowling history. This and more further demonstrate that waterfowl hunting is much more than an interesting aside or a footnote in California's history. Rather, it has been an integral to the state's development as any other activity. But in addition to that, all that our waterfowling history reveals about hunting culture and about the conservation of wetlands on private club lands, it is also to light the importance of wetland conservation on California's public, state, and federal refuges, as well as the important role played by conservation organizations such as the California Waterfowl Association, Ducks Unlimited, and Delta Waterfowl. In California, as elsewhere, hunters have been responsible in large measure for the continued existence of wetlands. We are now back up to some 3.5 million acres, by the way, from a low of 1 million acres, and therefore of the flocks of Pacific flyway waterfowl that return to the state, some 6.5 million of them every fall and winter. By bringing the history of duck hunters and duck clubs and refuges into our discussion, we can arrive at a fuller appreciation of the important role of waterfowling in California's history.
Welcome back to duck season somewhere, folks. I'm in Susan Marsh, California. That's where it's duck season today. Y'all been listening to my friend, Yancey Forrest-Knowles. You know, Yancey and I actually met down in Mexico duck hunting. We got to spend 4 or 5 days in the blind. We hit it off immensely. He's a talker. He's a storyteller. I'm a talker. I'm a storyteller. But in between the stories, we managed to shoot a whole bunch of ducks and have a good time. And he's a historian. He's a conservationist. He's had his hands in so many conservation movements here in California. But most importantly, he is a duck hunter. Yancey, how are you today?
I am doing great, and I am so happy to have you here with me.
Man, I'm glad to be here. You know, we've talked about my coming out to California during duck season since I've known you, and I'm finally here.
I can't believe it. I'm so happy. It's really a pleasure. Thank you.
I've been here for a while. I've been taking pictures, doing a lot of social media, and the inbox and the text are blowing up. Most people aren't aware that there's such a profound history and culture and serious amount of duck hunters here in California. You know, to most of the world, myself included, if you believe everything you see on TV, California's predominantly Hollywood glamour and surfboarders. But you obviously grew up a duck hunter. Is that true?
You know, I certainly did. My earliest memory of my father is walking behind him on the edge of a marsh when I was probably about 5 years old. I didn't actually get to start hunting with a gun till I was about 11, and that means that this year is my 67th opening day in a marsh somewhere, mostly in California, but, you know, sometimes in New Zealand, sometimes in Asia, sometimes in Western Europe, South America, Mexico, Canada, you name it. It's provided a lot of opening days for me.
Do you still remember your first duck?
I don't remember my first duck, but I sure remember my first hunt.
Let's hear it.
It was cold,
Yeah.
you know, and my dad wanted me to have a good time and had to carry me out across the water. I was so small. I was probably, again, 5, 6 years old, and we were actually, that particular hunt was near his home in North Carolina.
Oh.
We had family had property back there, and we hunted a lot along the Santee Cooper River, and I know you're probably familiar with that,
Yeah.
being a Southerner. And we hunted the swamps back there, and I'm telling you, I think hunting is in everybody's DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Some people get it tapped into. Some people get it tapped into real early. Mine was tapped into, and it happened to be ducks and geese. And I love all types of hunting and all styles of hunting, but it's the ducks that make me want to get up in the morning and get on the road. It's almost an addiction. I know that's a negative term, but I'll tell you, I couldn't imagine my life without being in wetlands often during the year.
Well, it's beautiful out here in California, and you captured my imagination. I was out here, I don't know, 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago. I hope it wasn't that long ago, Yancey, and for the California Waterfowl Association State Convention, and you grabbed me up at the airport. It was late August, and we went spinning around Butte Sink. And even with it dry and even with it duck season months away, I was blown away at the amount of habitat and the duck clubs and the dates on some of these duck clubs. And it's captivated my imagination ever since. And it took a while to get here, but here I am. Mm-hmm. And really getting to see and experience a lot of what California has to offer. But you grew up in that environment. That's right. You grew up here.
I did, and as a matter of fact, this Sassoon Marsh is one of the more well-known, more famous marshes in California. It still has about 150 clubs. There were about 250 clubs in this 90,000 acres of Sassoon Marsh at one point. And this is the spot where subsistence hunting and then market hunting took place for California originally.
How long ago would that have been?
That would have been in the 1860s. You know, the subsistence, of course, started immediately when people came in, but the market hunting was very, very strong starting in the 1860s. And it continued on the west side of this marsh until people started getting a little more leisure time, a little more wealth, and individuals wanted to come duck hunting then. Mm-hmm. You know, and to get here, it took them up to 3 days from San Francisco. Now it takes about an hour and a half in a car, but it took up to 3 days because they had to sail here.
Yeah.
And they had to tack back and forth, you know, across the bay in the different winds to get here. And so when the individuals came in and started leasing all the land, and we no longer needed the market hunters, the clubs came in. And right about the late of the 1870s when you had your first clubs here, 1879 to be exact. And most of the clubs were on the west side of the marsh originally. And the next thing that really made a difference and brought people into the marsh, besides the clubs developing, was the railroad came in. And as a matter of fact, the railroad is probably nationally what brought wilder areas and more difficult areas to get to available to the average man. And eventually it became the automobile, of course, but it was trains that changed it. And while we're sitting here in this clubhouse, you're going to hear trains go by. This is the same track that was put in the late 1860s. And this, by the way, they had 4 stops along this railroad right here, between the bay right out here, about 5 miles down the road, and the nearest town is Fairfield, Sassoon. But this train, the way people got here, let me step back a second. They would leave San Francisco on the ferry. They'd come across to Oakland. They'd get on the train. They'd come all the way up to Benicia, which is the nearest large town here. And by the way, Benicia was one of California's spots that it was a capital at one point. And then the train would be barged across the Sacramento River. The train would come right past these clubs. They had 4 famous stops. And you know where those stops are today because that's where the trains still have to blow their horns. And you drove across one of them when you came in here today. And then the train would go all the way to Sacramento. and then people would catch the electric train from Sacramento, and they'd go up to Marysville, Yuba City area, where you just were, and the wagons and the mules were there to to pick them up and take them out to the Butte Sink duck clubs.
It's interesting that we talk about the railroad, because we had Tom Sawyer, a historian down in Texas, on recently, and I've been up to Utah several times, met with Jack Ray and others, and back around 1879, 1878, in those late 1870s, when they connected the eastward bound and the westward bound railroads with a golden spike right there in the Bear River Valley around Great Salt Lakes. And same thing in Texas, same thing in California. It was at about that time, because of that technology of the old choo-choo train, it was that time that hunting in America transitioned drastically from subsistence/marketing to recreational. And in came this whole new era of conservation. It's crazy, isn't it, that sport hunters that come out, leave San Francisco and take a train for a little bit and come up here and shoot ducks on the Susan Marsh, or go to Utah or down to coastal Texas and shoot a bunch of ducks back in those days. They chased out the market hunters to bring in hunting opportunities, quality hunting opportunities, to go out, to immerse themselves in nature, to shoot duck and hunt. And a lot of the conservation laws that we have today and ethos started with that. And that just blows my mind.
Absolutely. And, of course, a major milestone in that conservation effort and stopping the market hunting was 1918. 1918, of course.
Migratory
Bird Treaty Act. Between Britain and the United States. Of course, Britain was, Canada was still part of Britain at the time, and of course it's gone on to include Mexico since then. But that's been a major role, and you're right. You're absolutely right. It's been waterfowlers who have saved the resource. It took a lot of education to learn that we needed to save the resource, and the biggest time I think in the U.S. where this became a reality was the 1930s, and especially during the Dust Bowl, and we realized we couldn't shoot a limit of 30 sprig every day anymore. We had to dramatically cut that back, and at certain times, certain years, we had a 30-day season in California in the 30s, and we had the shooting, the opening day starting at noon. There were all these things that were put into effect to help the conservation effort. They stopped allowing 8-gauge guns. You couldn't use bait anymore. You couldn't use live decoys. All these things happened in the 30s, and it was essential. If we hadn't done it at that time, I'll tell you what, we wouldn't have the ducks that we have today. Another important thing that happened in the 30s and 37, of course, was the forming of Ducks Unlimited, and it just went on and on and on. But I would say that waterfowlers are without question the chief conservationist.
Well, we always say, and non-hunters don't quite understand it. Anti-hunters won't accept the fact that hunters are conservationists. Yes, we shoot the resource, but we grow in abundance of it. We provide habitat. We're sitting here in this beautiful camp house overlooking hundreds of acres of beautiful marsh, and all I see as far as I got to the horizon are ducks flitting around. And they're sitting there just enjoying the resource. So that somebody can go out there and shoot them in tomorrow morning or whatever, but they've got the rest of the day to themselves. You brought out a pretty good point while reading your introduction about the clubs, and that's I know you've written books and written a lot of stories about the clubs in California, and again, like the trains and hunters and recreational versus market, again, the clubs, there are people that maybe have an axe to grind against, quote, rich private landowners, unquote, hogging up all the ducks, short-stopping them, shooting them. But, as I look at it, club members, their money that they put into the resource, into habitat quality, so that they can go out a few mornings a week and shoot ducks, but the ducks have the habit. It benefits all of society. To me, the clubs are especially when you get out in this part of the world out west where water is such a premium. They provide such an essential component in the conservation model.
Well,
and that's private landowners.
Yeah.
Motivated by their recreational interests that are providing societal benefit.
Well, I'm telling you, if we didn't have private duck clubs, we wouldn't have wetlands, and thus we wouldn't have waterfowl in California. And I would say the same is true for every state. But, as I mentioned earlier, we were 5 million acres of wetland originally in California, and we got down to less than 1 million. And we're back up 91% to be exact. We lost of our wetlands, and we have gotten back up to about 3.5 million acres, and that's due primarily to duck clubs, but also the advent of federal and state refuges and the conservation wetlands, strictly conservation, that lands bought by the Nature Conservancy or, TNC or Audubon or others. But all of these in conglomerate, we're back up to about 3.5 million acres. It's amazing. We still have 6.5 million waterfowl come into this state in the fall and winter. Originally, it's estimated it was about 40 million. But we still have 6.5 million regularly, and we still harvest about 1.25 million birds here in California. Can you imagine that with 40 million people? Mm-hmm. And you know why we do that? Because we were smart, and we bought these lands, and we learned how to manage them properly, moist soil management, and when to water, and when to take the water off, and everything, for the sake not just of waterfowl, but the 400 wetland-dependent species.
Right.
Waterfowlers are very generous. They love what they do, why they do it, and how they do it. It's our life, and that's what I tried sharing earlier, that waterfowling is an integral part of who we are, not just in California, but in North America. It's part of the economic, social, environmental, and cultural parts of where we live and who we are.
Mm-hmm. I would say that about duck hunting in general. I mean, it's not all about the trigger pull. It's about the people and the food and the culture. I'm blessed to get to travel around the United States, around the world, and a lot of times it's like walking through the pages of National Geographic magazine with a shotgun and waders, and that's what I love so much about it, is just the overall experience.
Yeah.
Now look, you've written some stories. I know that you have been to a lot of these clubs up here. What are some highlights? Tell us a little bit about the California Duck Club and some of the fun stuff, the lighthearted stuff. Tell us some fun stuff about duck hunting and what it's like. What is it like to be a club hunter in California?
Well, first of all, it's a privilege. It's a real privilege. When young people ask me today, what was it like when you grew up, where the sky is dark with ducks and so on and so forth? And I tell them, there were days where it was truly dark, opening day and some special storm days and so on and so forth, or dramatic cold events that brought all the birds at once out of Canada and so on and so forth. Yeah, the skies were dark on those days with ducks. But what was really different is we always had a place to hunt. Mm-hmm. You didn't, even the refuges that you hunted on, you could pull in Friday night in your car, and there might be a dozen cars in front of you. They didn't have lotteries, And today, some of those refuges, have 400 or 500 people trying to get in on a 10,000-acre refuge, But that was the big difference. But the clubs themselves, as I mentioned, there are about 1,000 active clubs today, some 2,600 clubs over time.
In all of California?
In all of California. Okay. But still, that's pretty amazing, 1,000 active clubs. And all of the clubs enjoy inviting guests. Some of those are folks that live in, that are members of other clubs, but a lot of them are people that are not club owners. So this is the way that we try to share the incredible experience that we're having. And I've been to over 200 clubs in the state, so wow. I think I have a sense, and I've traveled 55,000 miles in this effort of interviewing and photographing and getting to know what our clubs are like in California. and they range. It's an amazing range from literally little shacks that you're not even comfortable going into, to these incredible places that are almost palaces. And that's being pretty flamboyant in my description, but a great deal of money and effort and thought has gone into building them, and because they are places where people like to be and they like to entertain.
Right.
But you can be just as comfortable walking into that shack as you can in that magnificent building if it's a duck club, because the same thing brings all the people there. It's their love of waterfowling and all that means, that sunrise, that being with a friend or a son or a daughter, the dog you work, the calling you do, the magnificent sights and sounds and smells that you experience. But it's also about the human interaction.
That's right.
The camaraderie, being with people who have similar interests and cares and concerns and joys in life. And being in a club is one of the most unique things that a waterfowler can experience. The wonderful evenings, the cocktail hour, the hors d'oeuvres, the incredible dinners, the wonderful duck dinners. We all, most of all, enjoy
Absolutely.
the roasted duck dinners, but all the anticipation about what's going to happen the next morning, and how do different clubs select who's going to shoot what blinds the next day, the draw as we call it, and the anticipation of all that is what excites us and makes us look forward to the next hunt. And that culture is very, very strong in California, and it's what's going to make it so there will always be waterfowl and waterfowl hunting in this wonderful state.
Sure. When we did our tour that year around the Butte Sink, I'm from the Deep South, and rice, big rice fields. We're one of only 6 states I learned this week. The entire American rice industry is limited to 6 states: California, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Missouri. That's all the rice industry in the United States. And being from home, that's kind of a big deal. That's a good place to hunt. If you're on the X in an old rice field that's on the X, let's say, that's a good place to hunt. That's good habitat. And so we were riding around, and they were just harvesting rice. A lot was going on. And you explained to me that that's not really where the hunting necessarily is in Butte Sink. That for example, in y'all's camp at the time, y'all had a significant rice field, and because of decomp, you flooded it, but you didn't hunt it. You went off to another part of the property, and you had established more soil, what you call the willows. I hunted Butte Sink the other day, and it was natural and planted willow trees. It was smartweed. It was timothy grass. It was a lot of just natural flooded, and that's where the ducks wanted to be. That's a very foreign concept to me, a Deep South hunter. Wow, I'm going to leave a rice field alone and move over here and hunt natural? Wow, that's impressive.
Well, the Butte Sink is a unique place. I mean, it is without question one of the cherished.
Why? Why is it so unique?
Well,
talk about it.
I always say it's the trees. You see these incredible green timber hunts and dead timber hunts in Arkansas. The classic photographs and films you always see and everything. Well, this is the closest thing to it. And we have it right here in California in the Butte Sink. It's the trees. We hunt in the willows and the oaks and the tules and natural foods, especially the watergrass and the smartweed. And we are surrounded. We're about 50,000 acres total, and we are with some, 30 clubs, and we are surrounded by 500,000 acres of rice. There goes one of the trains right now. Could you see that? Yeah. It's really neat seeing that and hearing that. But we are surrounded by 500,000 acres of rice. So these birds, go out into the rice and they feed at night. and then they come back into the clubs in the morning, and that's what provides our shooting. And most of the clubs in the Butte Sink shoot to about 10 in the morning. Some shoot till noon. Very, very few shoot in the afternoon because we want to give those birds a place to rest, unencumbered, unpressured, so they'll make sure and be there day after day after day. Most of the clubhouses in the Butte Sinks are up on stilts, 10 to 20 feet off the ground, because quite often Butte Creek itself, which runs through the middle, floods. And when it does, you got to get out of there. It's like an ocean. I mean, it just changes overnight.
Well, let's talk.
Go ahead.
Well, Butte Creek will flood, but Butte Sink is just like this big natural depression. I mean, it's just like a bowl. It's like it's like a wash basin. Mm-hmm. So it attracts a lot of water. I was hunting up there the other day, and the club I was hunting at, it's all more soil now, but they used to be rice farmers. And he said the problem was the Butte Sink would flood, and our crops, and the ducks would just eat us out, and we were fighting them. And finally, my granddad was like, "The heck with fighting ducks. Let's just turn into more soil and make it a duck club, make it a duck property. We'll just capitalize on the ducks instead of on the rice because we're in this basin." Mm-hmm. Can you speak to what Butte Sink is, or how big it is? Or
yeah, it's about 50,000 acres, and it's right next to what's called the Sutter Buttes, which is the only spot, matter of fact, in the whole Sacramento Valley that has any relief to it. You know, it's about 2,000 feet high, and it's a beacon that waterfowl have been coming to for 10,000 years here in California now. Mm-hmm. And they settle in the sink. It's got this visual attraction, and they're creatures of habit, so they know that there's food there, and they know this 500,000 acres of rice surrounds it. And by the way, the things that, the way you get the water in the Butte Sink is you do have Butte Creek, but there are times where Butte Creek doesn't have much flow in it. And of course, in the olden days, and when I say olden days, I mean prior to, let's say, 1912, they had to wait till the rains came to flood it. Okay, so people didn't always get to start hunting in the Butte Sink early. They had to wait till the rains came, and in California they usually start mid to late November. So you may not have hunted except in certain areas that were naturally flooded until the 1st of December. But what happened was rice came into California in 1912, this new crop. And before you can harvest your rice, you got to get rid of that water. So they would send the water down Butte Creek and other creeks, and that would come in, and it would flood up the Butte Sink. But the problem was that it was not dependable, or sometimes they would send too much water. So in 1922, there was an agreement called the 1922 Agreement between the Butte Sink duck clubs and the rice industry. And this was a guarantee that they would send their water down when they drained their rice fields, but in a controlled fashion. They had to send the water down, but in a controlled fashion. So it was a reciprocal agreement, a reciprocal arrangement. And that's what gave some continuity to the Butte Sink, But originally it was just an incredible riparian habitat.
Well, I'd read something. I think that you had written one time that, for those listening, the Butte Sink is recognized as the world's smallest mountain range. And it's tiny.
The buttes, the Sutter Buttes
themselves. The Sutter Buttes, that's what I meant to say, the Sutter Buttes themselves. And I'm sitting out here looking at a wetland in front of me with a bunch of ducks. All it does, I was thinking, so I wasn't even thinking if I said that. But yeah, the Sutter Butte, smallest mountain range in the world. And there's some history going around it. I mean, hunting, historically, some of the major expeditions back when, as settlers and military were moving here.
1846, General Fremont.
Okay? Yeah.
He spent almost a whole month at the base of the Sutter Buttes, and some of his writings describe his men going out and what they brought back to camp in a day, for food. And that included, like, in one day they'd come back with like 15 elk, 20 deer, 200 ducks, it just went on and And I'm telling you, there were grizzly bears, too.
Oh, yeah.
California had a huge population of grizzly bears. They were a little bit smaller than the kind that you find in the Rocky Mountains or Alaska or other places, but still, nonetheless, real predators. And they were a huge problem for the farmers and the ranchers coming in, and just the settlers in general. These were nasty animals. So I think the last grizzly bear in California was harvested in 1921.
Wow.
But yes, it's a famous area, and it's probably known throughout the world as being one of the preferred spots to hunt. And all the blinds, or 99% of the blinds in the Butte Sink, are what we call stand-up blinds. We're standing in these camouflage blinds above the water. And that means that, your dog, most of the time, is not seeing the duck that you're shooting. You've got to have a great dog, well-trained, and they've got to be able to go out and follow those hand and whistle signals and get to that duck. A lot of tools, a lot of toolies, and it's tough for the dogs getting around. A lot of the retrieves are swimming retrieves. It's not all shallow water. Originally, the first boats that were used in the Butte Sink were called Thule splitters.
What's that?
And that's probably about a 10, 12-foot thin boat that's pointed at both ends. An individual would stand up in it with a long pole and pole his way out to the blinds. And then in the 20s, they started bringing in the first motors on boats to go out to the blinds. And when they did that, they had to build their canals, for the boats to get out in, because, of course, the outboard motors, the shaft would go down deeper and so on and so forth. So what that did is that gave deeper water to the Butte Sink in general. It was no longer a shallow marsh. It was probably, I'd say the average water depth in the Butte Sink is knee to thigh deep. It's just indescribable hunting. It's just this classic image that we all, think about in our mind, or we see in the magazines and the books and so on and so forth. It's a very, very special place.
It was yesterday, my first time to hunt there. We got the boat ramp cranked up. We motored. It was a large, spacious, floating blind built 30 years ago. The boat pulls right up into the belly of it. You step on this little deck. You got to bend over. You can't stand up because it's low. You walk. You sit up on the chute. You get to the shooting deck. You stand up. And the reason the boat cover's so low is because I can shoot 360 degrees around the roof of this blind. I mean, it's built perfectly, set up nice. And it was $1 million view. It was when the sun started coming up, and I looked to the east. There was Sutter Butte right there, and it was gorgeous, and just the purple water and these little clump-looking things out. It turned out to be just smart weeds and grasses and clumps of tules off in the distance, willows, and everywhere. The ducks in the sky, and my host said, this is nothing. It's not windy enough. This is nothing like what you'd see when it's really a lot of ducks flying. But in all directions I looked, it was like ants showing up to a picnic. It was just ducks flying, trading every which ways. And I'm like, this is, it was spellbinding. More than duck hunting, get ducks is the lifestyle we all enjoy. It really is always duck season somewhere. Check out our caps, t-shirts, hoodies, and more at our new GetDucks.com store. That's GetDucks.com/store. Thank you for listening to and for supporting this podcast. And remember, life short, get ducks.
One of the other values of the rice properties surrounding and going both north and south, east and west from the Butte Sink is that when they increased their acreage about 30 years ago to where it is now, almost doubled it, ducks now go home with 25% more body fat.
Oh boy.
Than they did just 30 years ago. So it's been a great health thing for the ducks, being able to go back healthier, be able to do a better job at producing their eggs and so on and so forth. So we consider agriculture our friend.
Absolutely.
It's
I know hunting some of the rice fields in the Sac Valley, we shot some pintail and widgeons that had more fat than any duck I've ever seen. They were as succulent as butter pats. It was unbelievable how good those ducks were to eat.
When the rice hunting is really good? You give me some wind, some real wind.
Like today?
And yes, like today, and I'm going to go out in a rice blind.
That's
where the good hunting takes place, in the big wind. Not to say that it's any less in the Butte Sink, but it's pretty neat being out there in the rice in the big wind.
That's where my buddy John Wills and I were today with Scott Feist, and everybody I have met or seen or talked to kept talking about the big wind, the big wind. Well, every day I've been here, we've been hunting 10 miles an hour, enough to steer a duck. They're like, no, big wind. And we went out there today, and it was a big wind. We had a headwind walking in and a tailwind walking out. You could feel it. And you really had to let those ducks get in right, because the minute you stood, the minute you shot,
they were gone.
You got one or two shots, and then they faded real quick with that wind. But it was, I'd say, 30 miles an hour. And you're right. I saw more ducks today than I've seen in the week I've been here.
I hunted once, and a lot of people will remember this. Let me see. It has to be about 15 years ago now. The wind blew so hard, he was measured at 88 miles an hour up in the valley. They closed the Golden Gate Bridge for the day. Let me tell you, you want to talk about some duck hunting. We weren't sure we wanted to go out at first and get, because it was kind of scary out there.
Yeah.
But, you saw trees being blown over. You saw telephone. This is the truth now. Telephone poles being snapped in half. But I'll tell you what a duck hunt.
Yeah.
Man, it was wonderful. But listen, as famous and as wonderful as the Butte Sink is, there are multiple famous wetlands, both tidal, coastal wetlands and inland wetlands in California. Everywhere from the northeast corner, the famous Klamath Basin, and I could talk for days about the Klamath Basin, to the northwest up in the Humboldt Bay, where a lot of brant hunting takes place. You talk about coastal California before the turn of the century up to about 1920 especially. Southern coastal California, the duck hunting and the goose hunting was indescribable.
Well, that had been like the Salton Sea?
No, that's inland. Right on the coast. I'll tell you about the Salton Sea in just a second, but the coastal duck hunting in Southern California, down and including San Diego, from all the way from Ventura all the way down to San Diego, was absolutely indescribable, because it was like wilderness almost. It wasn't really wilderness, but people wanted to live in or near cities in those days. So it was too far to travel, to try to live out there and get your kid to school and to go shopping and get to work and so on and so forth. So the only thing they had on the coast originally down there were wheat farms and duck clubs. And the water, unbelievable as this sounds, was all artesian. There was so much water at one point down there. And so the duck hunting was phenomenal. And, you talk about the Salton Sea, interesting story. 1905, the levees holding the Colorado River back breaks open. Colorado River comes in and floods this whole area in south central California and fills up this massive basin. And it took them almost a year to get that levee reclaimed, to get it back into shape again and shut that off. Now, what happened after that was that they started growing a lot of lettuce in that area. And the lettuce attracted widgeon. Tens of thousands of widgeon every night went into that lettuce, and it was just decimating the farms. So the ranchers and the farmers and everything really worked hard to get people to come over and set up duck clubs in the area. But what they did soon after we were there, they convinced the federal government to set up something called the feeding program. And in this program that went to 1989, actually, these clubs that enrolled had to sign agreements with the federal government, and they had to bring in so much poundage of wheat seeds every week and had to put it in a specific spot and to follow specific rules. For example, there couldn't be any blind within 200 yards of it and so on and so forth. But I'm talking about a lot of pounds, like 200 pounds of wheat seed a week. And so this attracted sprig overnight.
Oh.
Okay? It attracted sprig overnight. The sprig hunting around the Salton Sea was phenomenal.
Wow.
When they stopped the feeding program, and this was done because of certain organizations in the nation felt that this was really baiting and so on and so forth. And so it stopped overnight. There was a federal lawsuit, and they had to stop it. Overnight, the sprig hunting died off everywhere in Southern California. And it's come back quite a bit, actually, because a lot of those clubs are being rebuilt now, especially by the California Waterfowl Association, with mallard habitat.
Oh, yeah.
So the hunting has really come back in those areas. But all the way up, the high desert backbone of California on the east side, little reservoirs and clubs all through there. Then, of course, you have the whole Central Valley and the North Sacramento Valley. Then the South Sacramento Valley is actually divided in two parts. The northern part is, the San Joaquin Valley, and the southern half of it is called the Tulare Basin. And there still are massive number of duck clubs in the northern half, the San Joaquin Valley. The most famous area is called the Grasslands, both the north and south grasslands. Still about 250 clubs down in that whole area. And then below that, the Tulare Basin had a lot of clubs up until about 20 years ago when it just got so difficult to get water in there. They still have a few clubs, and they still shoot a few birds in that area, but nothing like it was a long time ago. But I want to mention, in that Tulare Basin, interestingly, was the largest lake west of the Mississippi River. And when agriculture moved in there, they started reclaiming it, of course. And by 1905, it was fully reclaimed. It was the most amazing wildlife area in its heyday. You've probably heard of Lake Tahoe. You've probably seen the pictures, 25 miles by 50 miles. The Tulare Basin was twice that size, the Tulare Lake, twice that size. There were elk in there. There were deer in there. The untold waterfowl. There was a commercial fishery. It was shallow. It was about 10, 12 feet deep at the deepest. Multiple Native American tribes around it and so on and so forth. Commercial fishery where they went in there and netted these fish. Interestingly, there was a commercial turtle fishery for turtle soup for San Francisco.
Golly.
It's an intriguing area, and San Francisco Bay itself, there were some 600 duck clubs over time. Some clubs would go and others would go. There was a little town. It's still there. It's almost gone now. It's, nobody lives there anymore. But on the southeast corner of San Francisco Bay called Drawbridge. And there was a drawbridge there because there was a train that went down and boats, sailboats had to go underneath it. But this little town of Drawbridge, 50% of the people that lived there were people who duck hunted, and the other 50% of the people that just loved that environment and wanted to live there. But those folks lived there, made their living right there, duck hunted every day of the year that they possibly could, just in a whole town of nothing but duck hunters and people that wanted to be near duck hunters. But the bay, I grew up actually hunting on the San Francisco Bay in the Palo Alto area. And, I can remember me and my buddies, or my buddies and I, to say it correctly, riding our bikes at 10, 11, 12 years old through town with our shotguns strapped on the handlebars, riding our bikes down to the bay. And nobody said a word. That's how the culture has changed over the years. If you did that today, I mean, you wouldn't make it a couple of blocks before the police would be called and so on and so forth.
My goodness, yeah.
But it was just the way it was not just where, because it was all of North America at that time. Our culture was to hunt. By the general society, hunting and fishing was a way of life, and it was really nice. At 76 years old now, it was really nice to have grown up in that time, in that generation.
Absolutely.
Yancey,
all the research, all the history, your lifetime growing up here for a long time, can you discuss some of the interesting people, some of the interesting and colorful characters in California duck hunting?
Well, yeah, you betcha. And boy, there's been a boatload of them, let me tell you. But one of the ones that I think you might find the most interesting is one that I've done some recent research on, and matter of fact, wrote an article on most recently. And this fella's nickname, or sobriquet, as you would say in French, was Duck-A-Minute Bill Banta.
Duck-A-Minute
Bill Banta. And this guy was famous in the 20s and 30s here in California. Matter of fact, in this marsh that we're sitting in right now, this was his prime marsh. This was a preferred hunting area.
This was his area.
In the whole Bay Area. Today, there are 10 million people living within 1 hour of this marsh right now. It's amazing that it's been preserved. But I consider Duck-A-Minute Banta to be the most interesting waterfowler in California in the 20s and 30s. And a lot of other people said the same thing. And I know that because in the old newspaper articles I've been able to find and other bits of research about Bill Banta, everybody said the same thing. He was an amazing hunter, an advanced sort of kind of guy for his times. But he grew up in the little town called Banta, which still exists, but it's unincorporated, about 15,000 people, right on the corner of Livermore, which is an East Bay town here in this area. Anyways, what he did was he developed a lot of duck clubs in California, and his duck clubs were always incredibly successful. And the first one was just for membership, but interestingly, all the ones afterwards were commercial clubs. People would come in and either get day shoots, pay for day shoots, or seasonal shoots. But the two that he had that were real famous in the Sassoon Marsh, the first one was the Banta Club, and the second one, and that was, 1925. And then the second one in 1931, when he came back, he left and he came back to the marsh, was called the Banta Gun Club. So that's how those two changed, the Banta Club and then the Banta Gun Club. And each of these were about 1,000 acres. And, the most incredible hunting. And in between that, he went closer to Sacramento in the area called the Yolo Bypass, which is a wetland area that feeds into the famous Delta, another indescribably beautiful and effective waterfowl hunting area in central California. But he had the backing of the San Francisco Elks Club, of all things, and he went in and he leased 5,000 acres on a place called the Mound Ranch. And then the Elks Club got more interested in it, and they said, look, we want you to try to buy some of that acreage and build a special duck club for our members and guests. So he was able to help them buy 1,000 acres of the Mound Ranch, and which is nearest the town called Dixon off of Highway 80, a little bit southeast out of there. And he built a 70-bedroom clubhouse, and they had incredible hunting there. The thing that made it so incredibly interesting to me was most of the hunters that went there were flown there in Bill Banta's airplane. 1926. Can you imagine that? 1926, flying your guests or members to your own duck club. So he was very advanced in a lot of respects. He was very advanced in bringing women hunting. You know, a lot of women still hunted in those days.
Yeah.
It was a way of life up until about World War II. Our society changed a lot right around those times, but women were prolific hunters. Matter of fact, historically, there were 3 all-woman clubs in California.
Really?
At one point.
Wow.
But he, you know, I forgot to tell you how he got this nickname. So
I was going to ask.
Yeah, he invited a lot of interesting people to come out and hunt with him, and he invited the sports writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, and that's the paper. It still exists in San Francisco. And he brought him out and to shoot with him, and that guy was so amazed at what Banta was doing, he just sat back and watched. And Bill Banta shot 30 sprig in 30 minutes, which was the legal limit in those days. And this guy nicknamed him, you know, Duck-A-Minute Bill Banta, and he was known that forever after. Commercially, professionally, he owned and ran hotels all around the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
But he made his fame in his duck hunting. And he's not an unusual guy. There were a lot of really interesting people. And today we still have a lot of extremely interesting people. And some of these individuals built incredible wetlands, private wetlands, and some people refer to them as the mega clubs in California. There's about a half a dozen of them. We have, but the important thing about these large, extra large clubs today is that their owners really are committed to the conservation aspect of waterfowling and wetlands. They put tremendous effort, tremendous amount of money, to be honest, into maintaining these wetlands. And it's kind of tough on some of the smaller clubs or the rice lands or something, because most of the ducks are attracted and want to stay on these larger clubs. But let me tell you, they benefit in the bounty of these clubs also, you know, when these birds do come off. I've hunted them all, these larger ones that I'm talking about, and they are memorable in all respects. They're strikingly beautiful, well-planned, this diverse habitat for a variety of waterfowl, ducks and geese. And they are really quite spectacular. Up in the far north, you know, you've got the Rancho Esquan. A little bit west of there, you've got Llano Seco. Coming down, you've got Bird Haven and Casa de Patos, and then you jump down into the Butte Sink, and down in you know, and the amazing clubs in the Butte Sink. The largest one, the one that really has the most positive effect on the Butte Sink, is the Bering Ranch in the northwest corner. And then you go down into the Delta, and you got Mandeville Island, you know, this incredible 5,200 acre island, the unofficial refuge in the Delta. Mm-hmm. And everything that the owners do to really make it a healthy, vibrant habitat for waterfowl is so very, very important. So yes, these gentlemen have created special places, and I'm telling you, they have great benefit for waterfowl in California. It's very important. They provide a very important role for that in California.
Yancey, you've been around a while. You've hunted a while. You've got a lot of perspective. And as we were talking about Duck-A-Minute, and I got to thinking about some of yesteryear's Hollywood glam crowd. They're totally different then.
Yeah.
What happened? What happened between then, Bing Crosby, Rock Hudson, all John Wayne, all those guys were hunters, and I love when there's several groups I follow online that post pictures of those guys out here duck hunting.
Matter of fact,
with pump shotguns and having a great. What happened between then and now?
Well, one of those clubs is just down the road here. It's called the Family Club, and Bing Crosby and Andy Devine were frequent guests there, and in that lower end of the Sacramento Valley down to what I call the Tulare Basin and that wetland area down there, that's where a lot of them hunted because they could drive, they could leave the LA basin where they worked, Hollywood. They could leave there. In a few hours, they could get up into the Tulare Basin. They could have a wonderful evening, visit with their friends, party, have great meals, get up in the morning, have a wonderful duck hunt, and turn right around and be back to work by noon at the latest, back on the set or wherever they wanted to be. And it wasn't just the actors, the directors and the producers and everything. They were all duck hunters.
Yeah.
It was a different culture. You mentioned John Wayne, you Robert Stack, the Crosbys, the Clark Gable, all of these people
Ernest
were great.
Hemingway. Yeah.
All these people were hunters because it was part of our national culture. Let me tell you a really cute story. You'll enjoy this one. In the Ventura area on the coast, which is part of Southern California, there are still 3 hunting areas right there. You have the Point Mugu, you have the Ventura County Game Preserve, and you have there's a missile base right next to it, and all 3 of these have wonderful wetlands. Anyways, Clark Gable initially belonged to the Point Mugu Club. And, in these days, most of the clubs were all men clubs. Women weren't allowed on the grounds at all, kind of a thing. Now, at Point Mugu, they had a big clubhouse with rooms in it for people to stay and everything, but they had 3 or 4 little cabins off to the side. And Clark Gable had one of those cabins. And so there is a wagon, even to this day at Point Mugu, that carries the hunters out, drops them off at their blinds, and comes back to pick them up. Originally, that wagon, it's a large wagon, was pulled by mules, and then over the years it was pulled by a big old pickup truck, and now it's pulled by 4-wheel drive vehicles. Excuse me. But so Clark had one of those little cabins, and one day the club president came by in the time period just before they took off to go to their blinds. So it's still dark outside, but there's a little diffuse light coming over the wagon from the clubhouse. And the president looks over there, and he sees this diminutive body in amongst all these men. And he goes over and he says, "Clark, you can't bring a woman guest here." He says, "But that's Lauren Bacall. That's my fiance." He says, "I'm sorry. She can't be here. She's got to leave now." He says, "And if you ever bring her back or any other woman, we're going to throw you out." And I'm thinking, wait a minute now, Clark Gable, I'm just trying to imagine this.
Yeah.
This one of the world's most popular, favored guys, he's probably thinking, oh, sure,
Yeah.
But several weeks later, same scene, just prior to being taken out, and club president looks over there and he sees the diminutive body. And this time he goes over and he rips her hat off, and this flowing, beautiful hair comes flying out over her shoulders and everything. And obviously it's Lauren, not Lauren Bacall, but who was it that oh boy, I'll think of a minute. I can't remember.
Lauren Bacall was Humphrey Bogart.
No, it was Humphrey Bogart's, but it was. I'll think of her in a minute. But anyway, so on the spot, Clark Gable gets thrown out of the club. I mean, literally, he's gone. He's out of the club. But let me tell you, about maybe 10 years ago now, interestingly, a good friend of mine in Southern California invited me over to his house, and he was showing this incredible collection of L.C. Smith shotguns. Biggest collection anywhere that I know of, something like 125 L.C. Smiths. What a collection. Wonderful. Anyways, the last one we get to, we look at, and he says, this is the gun that Clark Gable's wife had made for him for her wedding gift to him. And he opened it up, and there's the picture of Clark and his new wife.
Franz Dorfler.
Well, I just didn't remember. There was somebody else he married.
Well, he may have been married a bunch of times.
It was
Who
either.
knows?
No, there was somebody else. I'll think of
Frankly,
it.
he didn't give a damn.
You know, I don't think he did he? But anyways, it was nice to have this kind of full circle story and then see that, the actual gun that was made for Clark for his wedding and everything, and their picture of the two of them and so on and so forth.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
That is a great story.
He actually got thrown out,
that is a great
club.
story. Go ahead.
Can I tell you one quick
do.
more one?
Please do.
So up a little bit south of that Yuba City, Marysville area, there's an area called Wheatville, and I went to visit a fellow there, and that guy actually, Bing Crosby and he were best friends, and Bing hunted a lot of places, but this is the place that he kind of settled towards the end of his life and spent most of his time. And this guy told me two cute stories. One was that while in his home, one time around Christmas time, his son, who was like 10 or 11 years old and everything, the phone rings and his son picks it up, and the response was, "Hey, Dad, it's somebody named Bing Crosby for you," right? So he didn't know who this man was. So the fella comes up and spends about a week with him duck hunting and everything during Christmas. But the great story is they walk out to the blind, and it was a rice field. They're walking on the levee out to the blind in the morning on Christmas morning. And what is Bing singing? "I'm dreaming of a white Christmas." You could just imagine that.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good old day. Times have changed, haven't they?
Boy, haven't they? They really
Times
have.
changed.
But you know what? The same things that excite us and are meaningful to us as waterfowlers today are the same things that were meaningful to those folks 60, 70, and 150 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Have you got a favorite duck recipe?
I'll tell you, I've cooked duck so many different ways in my life, and what I do today is I fillet the breast and back leg together with the skin on.
Yes, sir.
And I'll throw it in a Ziploc with straight teriyaki for an hour or more. Throw it on the Barbie, real hot, 500 to 600 degrees. Put it skin side down. Cook it for 8 minutes. A nice mallard, cook it for 8 minutes. I don't even have to check it. I take it off. It's perfect every time. And if that skin has gotten burnt, beyond good taste, I might even remove the skin or something. But the meat is perfect every time. But that's just my go-to recipe right now. But I'll tell you what I really prefer to eat is a sprig, a teal, or a wood duck. Mm-hmm. Those are just, and of course in California we're so fortunate we have phenomenal speckled-bellied goose hunting, especially up north.
Oh boy, do you!
And you know the nicknames, ribeye in the sky, flying fillet. It's given for the right reason. It's indescribable. So my wife and I'll, that's our real preferred bird to eat. We'll throw a couple of breasts down like that, and it's I've had people over to dinner that have never eaten wild game in their life, and a husband or wife might say, "What kind of beef is this? This is the best beef I've ever had." And I have to say, you know what? It's waterfowl. It's goose in this case. It's that good.
That's good.
Yeah.
And that's a good simple. I think good simple recipes are good to remember. And I love, and I think it's a California thing. Mm-hmm. The way y'all handpick these birds and fillet the breast and the leg and leave it attached with the skin. Mm-hmm. It takes 80-90% of the edible part of that bird, all the good parts, and you can't go wrong, especially with these super fat ducks out here. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Our ducks, even our diver ducks are good. They are real good. And I heard you talk a little earlier today about shooting a ringneck, and some people go, "Oh, a ringneck, oh, da da da." Let me tell you, That was one of the preferred birds to eat at the turn of the century.
Really?
Oh, it was. And it's a great duck. And I'm talking mostly if you're eating them in fresh water or brackish water and not salt water, of course.
Well, you think about a ringneck. I love to shoot them because they're fun and sporting, but they're an interesting diver because where I hunt them back home and have hunted them primarily has been puddle duck habitat.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got a very similar diet.
Yeah. You know,
and
our ducks in California, they except for bay ducks, of course, they pretty much eat the same thing. They're eating. Well, there's a sequence of food that they're eating throughout the season. The sprig come here. First sprig come here mid-August.
Wow.
You know,
I had no idea.
And that's another value of these private duck clubs because they flood up early in anticipation of these birds coming in. But the birds are going to eat the waste rice first. And let me tell you, there's less and less waste rice all the time. It's less than one. It's about 1% now because of the efficient harvesters that are used. And it used to be 10-12% waste. Anyway, so they'll eat that rice, and then they get on those clubs, and they'll start eating, whether if it's down south, the swamp timothy. If it's up here, they're going to eat that watergrass. And then they're going to move to the smartweed, which gives up its seeds in December. Then they'll move on to other things like bulrush and, tules and things like that. There's probably 200 different plants that they'll eat in the Sacramento Valley. And when that's all finished, of course, what do they go to then? They need that protein. They're going to get on those freshly emerged insects and everything once it gets warm.
Yep.
And then, of course, the geese, they're going to get all the fresh green grass that's coming up and everything before they go back north. And that brings up the Klamath Basin in the northeast corner of California. Interesting place. Originally, it was some 390,000 acres of wetlands, both in the very north section of California and the very southern section of Oregon. The Klamath Basin transcends the border. It's on both sides. Today, it includes 6 federal refuges up in that area. But the first waterfowl nation, the second refuge, but the first waterfowl refuge in the nation was Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge.
Established by President Roosevelt.
Yes, 1908. Well, that lake was 90,000 acres at one time. It was huge. And it was so large that they had steam-run paddle wheel boats on it. And those boats ran all the way to Klamath Falls from that area. And by the way, Klamath Falls was originally called Linkville, and they still have a Link River. But soon thereafter, something was established called the Klamath Project. And what the Klamath Project did was started reclaiming all that land for agriculture and making land available for families to farm, and especially after World War I and World War II, where these fellows came back and they needed a place to farm and a place to raise their families and so on and so forth. And over time, we've lost the vast majority of the wetlands that we have up there. So what the Klamath Project did was everybody gave up their water rights to the federal government. And what the federal government did in return was to guarantee them water on demand. Okay? So that started drying up what is known as Tule Lake. It started drying up Lower Klamath Refuge, the two of three refuges on the California side. And as a matter of fact, from the teens all the way up to 1940, Lower Klamath Refuge was totally dry. So when agriculture was through with its water each year, they'd send their water into Tule Lake, and that started expanding Tule Lake so much back to its original size that they had to figure out a way of getting rid of that water, some of that water. So they built a 7,000 foot long tunnel through a mountain range between Tule Lake and Lower Klamath Lake called Sheepy Ridge. And they would pump that water out of Tule Lake back into Lower Klamath Lake. And that was finished in about 1940. So the lake received water again. But since that time, it's been very precarious whether they could get any water or not because of droughts and other priorities. One of those priorities, a serious priority, came in 1920. Excuse me. I'm off 100 years. In 2020, is that right? Let's think. Excuse me. I'm gonna start over. In 2000, they had a horrible drought. Water really warmed up in the Klamath River, which is the main source of water for all those refuges, and something like 70,000 silver salmon died.
Wow.
Which is the main source of protein for the several tribes, Native American tribes, that live downriver from there. And upriver from there, in Upper Klamath Lake, we started losing the short-nosed sucker and the Klamath River sucker, which are main part of the diet of the Klamath Indians. And so the Endangered Species Act, ESA, came in to protect these fish. So the first priority are ESA creatures for water in that area, and the tribes, of course. The second priority is agriculture. There is virtually no priority for the refuges whatsoever. So we're in a period of drought now where it has become so serious that there's literally, other than one spot, there's no water on the 90,000 acre Lower Klamath Refuge. Now, what that resulted in this summer is all the birds that would have been there went over to Tule Lake, just over the ridge, to Tule Lake, settled in there, masses of birds close together, water reduced. No fresh water, warmth, horrible hot summers, botulism set in.
Yep.
We lost 60,000 birds this year. Many of them birds that were raised in California, and we know that because as we collected them to get them out of there, many of them had bands on them, and the average bird was a 6-year-old California mallard that had gone up there to molt.
Boy, that'll hurt.
So we're back in drought again, so it's even going to be worse this year. So a group of us working with California Waterfowl Association developed what we call the Klamath Task Force, and our role is to get this refuge rewatered. We found a willing seller in southern Oregon and went to work on that process, and we're very fortunate in December to be awarded. This is, by the way, to get the water, the minimum water that we need for Lower Klamath, some 30,000 acre feet. It takes 90,000 to operate optimally, but 30,000 acre feet that we were putting in there, the cost is $50 million. Mm-hmm. This is a huge lift. You can't do it without the help of the federal government. So we were considered for an award by the Secretary of Interior, David Bernhardt. And, in fact, we were awarded some $6.3 million per year for 5 years. Not the full $50 million, but a significant portion of it. We were very, very excited. And then
but that's a lot. That's a lot of money that can go to a very valuable cause for the Pacific Flyway.
Absolutely.
And California in general. I mean, that's the lion's share of what you asked for, what you needed.
Absolutely. And I mean, we're so excited. And
Trump appointee, by the way.
Yes, indeed. And a short time after, politics being what they are, and the transformations that are taking place right now, and so on and so forth, that was taken away from us.
Uh-oh.
And so, depression set in, serious depression with us, and finally, we made up our minds we were gonna find this money somehow. Well, since then, we've received a good message that funding might still actually come to us, and if not, there are some wonderful foundations that are considering working with us. So
fantastic.
That's our task force. That's our main goal, to get that water back in there. And if we don't, I think you're going to see that waterfowling will be affected in California within 5 years.
What is, if anybody was listening, especially if they were in California or elsewhere in the Pacific Flyway, what could they do? I mean, is there anything that regular guys like me listening can do to affect whether or not y'all get that funding?
Yes, and we want you to do two things. We want you, of course, to talk to your congresspeople and let them know how important it is that they support the legislation that will be coming up very soon to fund water purchase for Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge. And the other thing folks can do is they can go on the California Waterfowl Association's website and follow the links to the Klamath Task Force, and they can make a donation according to their ability, of course. We have a need for working capital at all times for the efforts that we're putting forth. All of us on that committee are all volunteers. We're not getting a penny for this, so none of the money comes to us, of course, and it's tightly controlled. It's a C-1330.
I'm born and raised in Mississippi, and I support the California Waterfowl Association. I'm not aware of any other like group like CWA. What y'all do on the ground? I'm going to meet with one of your biologists tomorrow and record him. I mean, there's a lot the California Waterfowl Association does for California and for California hunters right here.
Absolutely.
I mean, I know you got Ducks Unlimited, you got Delta Waterfowl, you got these other national NGOs, but for a state group, I'm completely unaware of anybody that even comes close to being what CWA does.
Well, I appreciate the support, and I know you've had support for CWA since day one. Ramsey, there were some 20 state associations at one point. Now there's only a very few. Probably the second largest is the one in South Carolina, very active there. But California Waterfowl Association started in 1945 as the Duck Hunters Association of California, and then in 76 legally changed the name to California Waterfowl Association. And their roles are to protect our waterfowl and wetlands and our hunting heritage in California. And I would say emphatically, if it wasn't for them, we would not be hunting in California today. They have very effective full-time lobbyists that work both in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C., and they work very closely with the other conservation organizations, with DU and Delta Waterfowl specifically. But they do a wonderful job here, and 14 full-time biologists and other employees that help duck clubs either develop or improve. They have incredible programs for youth and women in hunting and minorities and so on and so forth. But they've had to make a lot of growth changes over the years as federal funding becomes less and less dependable, or less and less in amount. So over the last 10 years, they now own 6 wetlands themselves that they maintain and provide hunting opportunities for community folks, especially folks who don't have the ability or don't care to join to a duck club. They can go in and hunt these properties with CWA. And again, you can go on their website and you can follow the links and you can find out about how you can get involved. And dads and moms take their kids there and spend the night and get up, and the guide shows up and takes them out and hunts with them, and they all come back in and have their late lunch together, and so on and so forth. And this is great opportunities for the average hunter. And so I can't promote CWA enough. And I was chairman of the board about 10 years ago, and had the opportunity to work closely with this incredible staff and board of volunteers. It's a wonderful organization, and they're dramatically affected by COVID, of course, by all organizations that need to do fundraising to exist. So I can't promote them strongly enough and support them strongly enough, and mention to your listening community, if you have any interest in perhaps helping them, please do go on their CaliforniaWaterfowl.org and see what might be of interest to you.
I'm going to throw you a wild card, 'cause I got to ask this question. When we're fixing to wrap up, folks, because you can just tell Yancey and I spent a lot of time in a duck blind talking and visiting together. But Yancey, started off my trip on several days ago and hunted over on San Francisco Bay. We shot a bunch of divers, had a good time, and my host, Charlie Barberini, said, "Is there anything else you'd like to go see and do while you're in the area?" I said, "Yeah, I'd like to go see downtown San Francisco, big city, and Alcatraz and the Golden Gate Bridge and Haight-Ashbury." And so we go down there. I mean, we leave this wildness of San Francisco Bay shooting ducks and the beautiful mountains and everything, the Abloh Mountains in the background, all this good stuff. And all of a sudden, we're right at the epicenter of the hippie movement back in the day.
Haight-Ashbury.
Haight-Ashbury.
Yeah.
But I'm going to ask you, because you were a young man. I tried to do the math, and I'm not very good, and I ran out of fingers, but I tried to do the math. You'd have been in your teens and 20s when all that was going on.
In my 20s, really, yeah.
What was it, of all the United States and all the places in the world they could have come, what was it that attracted those young free spirits to that street corner, to right here? Why to California? Why to that part of California? Why not, I don't know, Midland, Texas? Why not somewhere else? You got a guess on this? How did it all start right here in San Francisco?
That's where the famous bands all lived.
Okay.
All of those bands that provided the music. In the
Grateful Dead,
the Grateful Dead especially, and
okay,
and the many others, the Jefferson Airplane, and you could go on and on and on. They were all right there in the Haight-Ashbury, and that attracted so many others. California, each state has its uniqueness, but the social scene in California is very special, and there have been a lot of special. Look at L.A. You got Hollywood, and San Francisco is it's one of the 5 or 6 most vibrant and special cities in the whole world, I think. Paris would have to be in there, of course, and a few others like that. But, and then, of course, one that, I'll just throw out for other reasons that you and I both would agree about, and that's Buenos Aires.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
The Paris of South America. Hey, anybody out there that hasn't been yet, you don't know what you are missing.
Yeah.
And I don't mean just the social life. I mean the great hunting and fishing
right.
that's available in Argentina, too. But it's my favorite place in the world.
One of my favorite, too.
If I was 20 years old or not married,
yeah,
I'd be there in a heartbeat.
You bet you.
And what a special country. But the center of that, of course, is always Buenos Aires. But
that answers it. The rock bands, the movement, what a special time. And I wanted to bring that up. I wanted to bring it up because when the rest of the world thinks of California, that's what you think of. You think of San Francisco. You think of the conspicuous vocal minority politics of California. You think of the Hollywood people and their opinions, but that's not California. This is California. 90% of this great state it could be just any Mayberry RFD in the Midwest that you pick. It's just regular folks that have a profound hunting culture. It's such a contrast. It's such a little part, just a street corner in this great big state defines to people that haven't been here and experienced what I've experienced this week in the world of duck hunting. Or heard your story.
But also, Ramsey, you're the kind of person that attracts that special part of humanity that means so much to all of us. You you are the epitome of that, and you attract people, and people are attracted by you, and so on and so forth. And so you have the ability to find and seek those special corners of each town, and special people in each town and everything. And we got 40 million people in this state.
40 million people. I wondered how many people
it's
there were.
Absolutely amazing. That can you imagine we have?
That's 15
we have
times
some
the
of the
state
best
population of Mississippi.
And we have some of the most incredible waterfowl hunting in North America right
Sure
here.
do. But it didn't happen by accident.
No, it happened because we have waterfowlers and others who are also conservationists, and they understand the value and importance of maintaining these special wetlands, keeping them healthy. And it's not just about the ducks, only the ducks and geese. There are 400 species that depend on these wetlands. Mm-hmm. And it's really a statement on who we are as people.
That's right.
If we keep them healthy, they help keep us healthy.
All of humanity.
And I just don't mean physically healthy, but emotionally and spiritually healthy. So we're very fortunate to still have some 55,000 duck hunters in California. We sell about 60,000 duck stamps, but about 5,000 of them are duplicates or collectors and so on and so forth. But 55,000 dedicated, passionate waterfowlers, and again, about 1,000 clubs, about 40 federal and state refuges. And I will say with cautious optimism that we're going to see even better hunting in California if we can just get guaranteed water. Mm-hmm. We're going to see wetlands increase. We're going to see waterfowl increase. And people will always be able to hunt ducks and geese in California. It might be, that you're going to have to either hunt on a refuge or be an owner or a guest at a private club. But you're still going to have places to hunt. You can hunt on California waterfowls properties. Do you know that San Francisco Bay is still almost entirely open for hunting?
Oh, yeah.
You can go a variety of places in San Francisco Bay and still hunt ducks. And I don't just mean divers, I mean great puddle ducks. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing, wetlands have an amazing ability to heal if you just treat them right. If you get them water when they need it and you keep that water clean. They're always going to be prolific places for waterfowl and other wetland-dependent species.
Amen. Folks, y'all have been listening to my good friend and hunting buddy, Mr. Yancey Forrest-Knowles, sitting here in the Susan Marsh of California, an amazing state. You guys that like to jump in a pickup truck or hop on a plane and fly somewhere to hunt, hey, California belongs on your bucket list. I don't have any U.S. Hunt List outfitters here. I'm just saying, as a duck hunter, the public land hunting opportunities, the private land hunting opportunities, there's a tremendous amount of hunting opportunity here, a tremendous waterfowl culture I was surprised to experience. But anyway, thank y'all for listening to Duck Season Somewhere. I'll see you next time.